Hey guys, I do not want to seem like I'm trivializing this topic at all. If anything, I want to emphasize the enormity of the question of playing video games and quitting video games for our generation and for every generation to come in the conceivable future. The experience of quitting alcohol, the experience of quitting cocaine, when you think about it, impacts a relatively tiny percentage of the world's population. You'll always meet people who just, for no particular reason, never really got into alcohol. I've met people who just said they didn't like the taste, growing up as a teenager. I've met people who said they didn't like the way it made them feel. So even when they were going to parties as a teenager, other people were getting drunk and they just weren't into it. There are a lot of people who have never been through the process of quitting alcohol, who've never developed a dependency or an addiction, and also just never even developed a habit for it. And yet, when you think about it on a global scale, almost everyone who is not a gamer today, anyone from a society that has regular access to electricity, they have made a conscious choice to quit playing video games or stop playing video games. I'm 38 years old, so I remember how it was decades ago. And, if you're a college kid watching this video, let me assure you, your professors went through it. This is not such ancient history. You know what I mean? And you will have some professors today who are still playing video games. You will probably have some professors in university who are quietly struggling with video game addiction. But everyone you meet, unless they're 90 years old and very traditional and lived on a farm in the countryside or something, almost everyone you meet who doesn't play video games made an intentional decision not to in the current generation of people alive on planet Earth. The author, George R.R. Martin, who's primarily famous for Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, I remember him just commenting in passing. An interviewer asked him if he ever played the video games that were based on his book, that were based on his most successful books, and he answered no, he can't allow himself to play video games. He's a very elderly man. I'm sorry, I don't know his age. But he said he could not allow himself to play video games. He enjoyed playing them. He enjoyed it too much. And he knew he wouldn't get any work done if he let himself play video games. It's not really something as simple as addiction and quitting an addiction. On a small number of people struggle with video game addiction. On a much larger scale, on a scale of millions, and indeed I think billions, more than 1 billion in the world certainly, we're not talking about addiction. We're talking about the choice to lead a meaningful life and what that really entails. And the choice not to play video games in order to live a meaningful life, in order to pursue some goal or some objective. So just say, I'm not making light of this. I'm wearing my sarcastic me never shirt for this video. But I'm not joking around. This is a meaningful question in my own life. It's a question that's touched the lives of many people I know personally. And again, when you scale it up and think of society as a whole, it's a huge issue now and for the future. And it's an issue I'm absolutely certain I'm going to have to talk about with my own daughter. My daughter is now 4 years old, and she does play video games at age 4. It's an issue I'm certain I'm going to have to talk about with my daughter, not once and not 10 times. I'm certain it's going to come up 100 times in the course of my parenting in the next few decades, possibly even when she's in her 20s and what have you. It's not a decision you just make once. And I think most people, if you're really speaking honestly and autobiographically, you'll be able to say there were different periods of your life when you played video games. Maybe as a child it was this way, maybe as a teenager it was this way. And then I think most of the people who've made videos about this, I've looked around on YouTube, they talk about the fact that maybe in their 20s they went back and forth, they had periods of quitting and then trying to play video games moderately and making decisions of this kind. Most of us as adults have a crushing realization that our time is precious. And it's not a happy or wonderful thing. It may be when you get your first full-time job that you realize this. It may be when you have your first child that you realize this, and you're spending so many hours a day just taking care of this infant. But at some point or another, I think most people, as grown-ups, you look at the clock on the wall, or you think of the pie chart of how many hours you've got in the day and what you're doing with them, and you realize your opportunity to make the most out of life, whether it's in terms of the books you read, the things you do, the humanitarian aspirations you have, the creative aspirations you have, whether you want to be a poet or a painter, or you're interested in politics, making the world a better place in some way, or just cultivating your own mind, learning something about history or making some meaningful difference. the number of hours you have in a day to do that is always going to be too few as an adult. And that's a contrast from the feeling of youth during your childhood. You probably felt that every day had hours and hours for you to fill up, that it was just a question of dealing with the boredom, the boredom of childhood, the boredom of youth, of having so many hours when you weren't at school with nothing in particular to do, and where your main challenge was staying out of your parents' way, was maybe not making your parents angry or not annoying your parents. And of course, playing video games in many cases becomes a substitute for a babysitter. It becomes a substitute for real quality time or other activities, for the family that would be harder for your parents to manage. So it's a way of parents getting rid of kids doing a safe activity. They don't need to be watched or monitored by their parents while they're doing it, and that just eats up hours of the day. I looked at, since I made my last video on this topic a couple days ago, I looked at other YouTubers who've addressed this, and there are not that many. There doesn't seem to be a lively scene within YouTube of ex-video gamers or game quitters, people who are anti-video game, which is already a surprise to me. So, compared to vegan politics or animal rights or even Buddhism, there doesn't seem to be a lot of heat on this issue at the moment. Maybe it's something that comes and goes in and out of vogue. But I think a lot of the videos I did see in the last couple of days, they start by taking a false first step, in that they look at video games as a form of enjoyment, the enjoyment of life, and then they try to emphasize to the viewer that instead you should cultivate a diversity of other forms of enjoyment, pursuing the opposite sex or pursuing the same sex, if you prefer, dating, romance, cultivating friends, family, and activities like mountain climbing or world travel. They just sort of present a varied palette of what they consider to be a good life of self-indulgence, of enjoyment, in contrast to a life that is disproportionately devoted to this one source of enjoyment, to playing video games. And I think that's a contrast to the notion of honor, duty, aspiration, ambition that we even see within the video games themselves. Video games do not typically portray as the main character someone who is fatuous, self-indulgent, and simply trying to enjoy life, simply indulging in the pleasures of life. If you think about the protagonists or the heroes of video games, if you think about the type of career and life that's depicted in video games again and again and again, it's very often a medieval character. It's a set of kind of Bronze Age virtues or even Stone Age virtues. The type of self-sacrifice, heroism, devotion to a cause, indeed, stereotypically trying to save the world. This is very often the purpose of video games, to save the world. What these video games feature again and again is a resolute and purposeful life that has absolutely nothing to do with enjoying yourself, that has nothing to do with your happiness, that very much presumes as part of its premise and its plot that a hero, that an adult character playing a leading role in this video game is, without any hesitation, willing to sacrifice all the comforts of home, pack up his sword and his bow and arrow, and go out and save the world, go out and take on some quest or some endless series of quests to make the world a better place, to save the planet, to conquer, to put his stamp, to make his mark on history, whatever the case may be. So I think actually the contrast that you can confront video game players with is not between a more diverse and so-called healthy life of self-indulgence, a form of happiness, to live for one's own happiness. You should instead dissipate your energies into these various leisure activities and not just one leisure activity. I think the question to ask is, why aren't you trying to live like your own heroes? As absurd as that may be, why aren't you trying to be like Link in The Legend of Zelda? Pick any kind of stereotypical mission to save the world video game. What's your mission? What's your aspiration? What's your ambition? Why aren't you the hero in your own plot? Why isn't your life your own video game in which you are on some series of fool's errands? Now, life is long, especially if you're not tragically killed in a bus accident. In real life, people who have that kind of motivation often go through a series of disillusionments. They often complete one mission and are disenchanted and take on another. I'm very self-critical about the kind of missions to save the world, make the world a better place I've been on myself. When I was involved with the Green Party in Canada, with ecology in Canada, of course, very quickly you become cynical about and insightful about what's right and what's wrong with the Green Party, the ways in which it's a waste of your time, what have you. But of course, that can lead to, more effective activism thereafter. You taking on a new direction. You learn, you adapt. You either take on a new mission or change the way you're doing it. I went and did humanitarian work and was really concerned about humanitarian work in Cambodia and Laos, Southeast Asian countries. I wasn't a fool. I wasn't trying to save the world. I was already a pretty cynical, down-to-earth, pragmatic character. But sure, I can also make fun of myself for that. When I talk about it with other people who know the field, in some ways I can speak very positively about that experience and how much I learned from it and positive outcomes from it. But in other ways, sure, I can criticize my own naivete to some extent, or not even naivete. The extent to which my ambitions, my hopes and dreams were impossible to satisfy, impossible to realize. But so what? Challenge yourself. Do the impossible. Don't take on beating level 12 in a video game. Don't take on a task that's been designed to be possible for your amusement and diversion. Take on impossible tasks. And when do you want to do that? When do you want to have that ambition? When you're in your 60s? When you're in your 50s? When you're in your 20s? All of the above. I met people doing humanitarian work and doing scholarly work, because I did both research and humanitarian work. I met people doing the same things I was doing in Southeast Asia after their retirement, in their 60s. And I met people doing it in their early 20s. You met people at all different stages of life who decided on whatever the issue was, because I worked in a diverse range of fields, whether it was something in the arts that they had their ambitions, a humanitarian field like HIV/AIDS, research humanitarian work, that straight up handing out sacks of rice to starving people, that kind of direct humanitarian work, or more philosophical and historical research. And again, it could be including, massacres, crimes against humanities in the 20th century. So not ancient history, but recent history, where people are still alive, interviewing them, documenting that history for another generation. Whatever their passion was, taking on big, ambitious, impossible goals, if you like, where you become, the hero in your own game. And it may end tragically, or it may end with your disillusionment, and it may end with your boredom. It may end with you having a rage quitting and taking out another game. Sure, that's part of the drama and verve in life. But I think actually you're missing the point if you treat video games as just one form of enjoyment, and you reach out to people who are so-called video game addicts and say, no, you need to deepen and diversify your enjoyment of life. I really say the opposite. I say, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why is your life just about enjoyment? Why are you living for self-indulgence, for happiness, for these kinds of shallow pleasures? And I ask that of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, right up to their 60s and 70s. I would ask that of my own grandmother. She was still alive. I don't think people should live that way at any age. Well, any age above 20. If you're 4 years old, admittedly, at 4 years old, your life may just be devoted to self-indulgence and short-term pleasures. Your life may just be one popsicle after another, and it may just be one video game after another, from the age of 4 to 12 or something. Okay, I've got to put in a caveat there. But sure, I do think that as adults, we should take on ambitions, both in trying to make the world a better place, and more immediately in trying to make ourselves better people. You may utterly fail to transform the world if you go and do humanitarian work in Cambodia, or you take on some more scholarly pursuit that's entirely in a library, whatever kind of research or humanitarian goal or political goal you may have, maybe straight up party politics, whatever it is. You may utterly you may utterly fail to change the world, but I guarantee you will not fail to change yourself. Even if the outcomes are tragic, even if the outcomes are heartbreaking, even if you go through a long series of disillusionments, what you learn in that process, it's going to become part of who you are as an adult. And that is an experience you can never have with video games. And you can never have it with card games. You can never have it with billiards. You can never have it with games, period. So my message is not just about quitting video games. It's really about quitting everything and about taking on real ambitions, real goals, even though those goals may lead to your own destruction. To be sure, in my own story, there was a reckless and even self-destructive element to the ambitions I have. Some of the things I did, I could say I wouldn't have wanted to do them if they were easy. I wouldn't have wanted to do them if they were safe. I didn't want to be involved in humanitarian work in Sri Lanka. It was too safe. I wanted Cambodia. You know what I mean? Within Laos, I could have stayed in the capital city. No, I wanted to get up on the border where the civil war was still going on. I wanted to be in the most dangerous areas where the red hot bullets were still flying and where the starvation was still a problem, where the humanitarian work was there to be done. Even within research, I always wanted to be on the frontier, the ragged frontier of where things were unknown, where things hadn't been done before, where there was impossible work to be done. I wanted to test myself and push myself to the limit. And I wanted to do all that when I was a young man because my professors at university were old men who had never done those things. I saw my professors as men who were outwardly successful but were inwardly failures. And if I had a choice, I'd rather things were the other way around.